Okay, hello and welcome, members of the Chinese Medicine Practitioner Meetup Group, hosted by Kamwo. My name is Thomas Leon, and I'm the organizer of this group and your host for this afternoon or evening. I guess it depends on where you're joining us from. I want to take a moment to welcome all the new members to our group. I hope you will enjoy what we have lined up tonight, and hopefully this is the first of many events to come for you. The mission of our meetup group is to connect members with respected authorities on subject matters within our profession and to create a space where members of our community can come together to learn from each other. The events are always free and our speaker suggestions come from you, the members. So if you have suggestions for speakers, send them to us. And by the way, this is our 141st event. So we've been on, I think Henry's been a few at least. By attending tonight, each of you, the attendees, will receive a $20 coupon via email. So please look for that in your email. That'll be forthcoming in the next couple of days. If you don't see it, look in your spam box. Okay. So here's some ground rules. Please mute your microphones, but feel free. And I would even encourage you to leave your camera on, even just a little bit. So the rest of us can see each other's faces. I think we missed that. And past surveys, meetup surveys, the suggestion is, yes, it's nice to see other people's faces, even if it's 5 minutes and even if you didn't comb your hair. It's okay, a lot of love. Okay, and as for questions, please hold off any questions until our guest speakers give us the cue to answer. If it's something that's urgent, you can type it in the text box. I will see it, press the raise hand button, and I will get to your question. But if it's not an urgent question, please wait until the end. There will be a Q&A session in the end, and Henry will be here to answer your question. This talk tonight is about 1.5 hours long and approximately ends 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And now, without further ado, let me introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Henry McCann, which I've known a long time when we were both younger. Not that we're old. Henry is the co-author of Practical Atlas of Tongue's Acupuncture and the author of Pricking the Vessels, Bloodletting Therapy in Chinese Medicine. He's on the faculty of Pacific College of Health and Science and lectures at advanced practice doctoral programs throughout the United States, oftentimes on the West Coast, I know that. He has also taught at Tongue's acupuncture extensively in Europe, Asia, and Australia. Dr. McCann is passionate about moving acupuncturists beyond the basics by examining traditional lineages of practice in conjunction with classical medical texts and then applying them in the modern clinic. So without further ado, let's all welcome Henry McCann. We do this, right? Because we can.
Thank you.
This is welcome. Clap. All right, Henry, take it away. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom. It is really, it's nice to be doing a meetup. Hopefully the next one we can be in person as well. But it really is actually nice to have this opportunity to talk to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to schlep into Manhattan on a Thursday night. Which, sometimes is fun, sometimes not, depending on the traffic, of course, better than I do. I just took a look at some of my files and it looks like I've been doing meetups since 2009. I think one of the first ones we did was 2009. So it's a long time now. And so it's fun. It's always a good group and it's nice to have people come into the Kamwo community, whether it's the in-person Kamwo community or the national, international, because we have so many different ways of connecting now, Kamwo community. So tonight we're going to be talking a bit about this word called Yangsheng. So I think most of you, or at least many of you I know, have heard this term before. For those of you who are not familiar with the term Yangsheng, it's, we can think of it as sort of like the original, the OG preventive medicine concepts. And so it's a term that refers to all sorts of things that we can do both in terms of what we do professionally, what we can apply remedially in the clinic, as well as what we can do personally in our own lives in terms of diet, lifestyle, the ways we simply move through the world, and the ways we can teach our patients to move through the world so as to promote longevity, prevent disease, et cetera, right? And, one of the things that I think really characterizes Chinese medicine, especially if we look at the historic literature, is this real significant emphasis on these ideas of disease prevention, right? Many of you are familiar with some of the early canonical writings of Chinese medicine, really characterized by texts such as the Yellow Empress Classic, the Huangdi Neijing. And we'll see some of the really sort of foundational chapters of this text from the very beginning. This is their focus, right? So this is part of our heritage, and it's an important part. The downside is sometimes, those of us who, all of us here went through Chinese medicine school at some point. There's so much to learn. There's so much to learn that we have to get into people's heads so they can get out and be, competent clinicians. Tom and I have both spent a long time teaching things like single herbs, and I think it's great. It's a lot of fun. I haven't taught single herbs in actually quite a few years now, but I taught one of the single herbs classes. Tom taught one of them. I taught one of them for I think it was 5 or 6 years. I taught one of the single herb classes at PCOM, and it's fantastic. But it's a lot of information. It's a lot of information. So even though Chinese medicine talked quite a bit about this idea of prevention, the reality of our training is that we just don't have a lot of time to go too deep into that concept, right? So we pay lip service to it, but what does it really mean? How can we think more deeply about it? And how can we then frame those ideas in a way that's clinically relevant, and not only relevant in the clinic, but relevant outside the clinic in our patients' lives? This becomes an important question that I think that now, after you're, outside of school, we can sort of maybe contemplate a little bit more. So tonight we're going to do just a very, very short introduction to this idea of Yangsheng through the lens of the seasons. Since, as we'll see from the quotes that we'll pull up, this is a big deal in Chinese medicine, right? How do we coexist with our natural environment is always a big deal. And the seasons are, whether we take them literally or we take them as archetypes of various different types of movements in the natural world, they become really important in terms of how do we frame our lives, how do we frame our clinical practices, right? So that's going to be the talk. This is a very, very sort of brief introduction, but hopefully one that will be useful. Like most of my classes, and many of you online here have taken classes with me before, you'll know that a typical format for me is that we're going to start with very, very broad topics, very, very broad philosophical statements, and then work our way down to what does it actually mean on, more specifics on a day-to-day basis. So within Chinese medicine, we have this, so within Chinese philosophy, we have this idea of Qi and Yong, which is sort of like theory and application, right? Or concept and application. And the basic premise within Chinese philosophy is that the theory is not so useful unless you have practical application, right? But then the practical application is not so actually useful unless you have some sort of significant understanding behind why we're doing it. So we study the theory, we study the big concepts, so we have a better idea of how we look at the practical application. And then the other side is also true. We look at the practical applications, not just so we can memorize a bunch of tricks, right? But we look at the practical applications so as to better illustrate the theory. So they both have, you have to look at both sides of it. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to start with some of the bigger picture concepts, and then we're going to work our way down to more of the actual sort of specifics and details. Okay. So there's your preview. Let's get to the nitty gritty. So we're going to bring this up. So here we go with the Four Seasons Yangsheng, and you'll see that I gave it the subtitle of Yin Yang 5 Phases in the Four Seasons. Why? Because you, as hopefully we'll see, fundamentally nothing we do escapes these basic concepts of Yin Yang, and by extension 5 phases. Everything that you studied in your first semester of Chinese medicine theory this is what, honestly, it's all based in. It's how do we more adeptly sort of manipulate the material and understand it at a deeper level. So let's first look at a couple of big picture ideas. So the search for longevity within Chinese medicine and Chinese culture at large is something that goes back into far antiquity. If we look at early medical manuscripts that have been unearthed at archaeological sites today, for example, one of the most famous probably is the texts found at Mawangdui, which was a tomb site that was sealed off really at the beginning of the Han Dynasty. In the Han Dynasty, we don't have to go into specifics, but just roughly speaking, 200 years before the year zero, 200 years after the year zero, about 400-year period of time, zeros in the middle. This is really the sort of foundational period of time for quite a bit of Chinese medicine, the way we think of it as Chinese medicine today. But there was a tomb site that was sealed off in the early part of the Han Dynasty, really within the first 50 years or so of the period, that was unearthed in the early 1970s in China. And in it, we found a treasure trove of manuscripts. They weren't books because they didn't yet have books on paper. They were either on what we would think of as silk scrolls. Sometimes they were bamboo slats with the characters carved onto them. And it was an incredible find of all sorts of texts. That included philosophical texts. So some of the earliest versions of books like the I Ching, the Book of Changes, and the Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching were there. We had books on mathematics, we had books on military strategy, but for us, more importantly, books on medicine. So lots of these books on medicine represent some of the very earliest untouched texts that we have to date that help define our tradition as Chinese medicine. And a significant portion of those texts dealt with what we today, or what scholars today oftentimes call macrobiotic hygiene. And what this means basically is Yangsheng. Right? How do we eat to encourage longevity? How do we sleep? How do we live to encourage longevity? So all of these topics were of really supreme importance to early Chinese thinkers, not only physicians, householders, and even we can see within, so many of you probably can recognize this type of diagram as being related to Taoism as a tradition. So even within early Chinese religious traditions, this idea of longevity becomes quite important. And the character you see here on the side, I think you can see my cursor. This is the character Xian for an immortal, right? So an immortal is in the limited context that most of us can hope for is someone who lives a really long time, right? So sometimes in Chinese, we call people who live a really long time, long, healthy life, they call them longevity stars, right? Because they exemplify this ideal. In the religious context, it gets taken other meanings as well. But so this becomes a core pursuit of Chinese, not only Chinese medicine, but Chinese culture and Chinese religious thinking as a whole from a very early period of time. If we look at some of the early philosophical texts of China, and this is not a medical text, this is a philosophical text. This is the Spring and Autumn Annals of the Liu family. This is the Liu Shi Chengqiu. So the quote here is, as to human desires, this sort of sums up the human condition. We desire longevity and hate to die young. We desire safety and hate danger. We desire honor and hate disgrace. And we desire leisure and hate to work too hard, right? So that really does sort of sum things up. And notice even the very first one here, and it's not necessarily a coincidence that this is one of the first things that's listed, is we have this sort of drive to live a long time. So this longevity becomes this important thing. And you can see that character in red in the Chinese. For those of you who read Chinese, you can read it. If you don't read Chinese, that character in red there is that character for longevity. Okay. So now let's get to the medical tradition. So the first quote here that I'll give you is from the second chapter of the Suwen. This is the Yellow Emperor's Classic Plain Questions or Simple Questions section. This is a very important and very famous quote. It goes, "The sages did not treat those already ill, but treated those not yet ill. Now when and there's more after that, but you can go back and find the original later. Now when drugs are employed for therapy only after a disease has become fully developed, when attempts at restoring order are initiated only after order has fully developed, This is as if a well were dug when one is thirsty, and if weapons were cast when the fight is on. Would this not be too late too? Right. So the idea is that in the best case scenario, we prevent disease. Now, the reality of clinical practice, as you're all practicing acupuncturists, Chinese medicine practitioners, or someday will be, is that patients don't usually come to us. I have this fantasy about California. You know, some of you if anyone here is from, Jason's heard me say this before. So my fantasy about California is everyone has an acupuncturist from birth and they all go to them first and they go to them before they get sick. I've been told that that's not really the truth. I like that fantasy though. But you know, here on the East Coast, people come to me after like an arm. It's like the Monty Python movie where the guy's arm is cut off and it's just a flesh wound. That's when they come to see us. So we have to be able to treat disease, but ideally in the process of treating disease, exemplifying for our patients how we stay healthy becomes an important piece of practice. And for us as well, how we stay healthy becomes an important part of our practice and our lives. So this is another quote from the Suen. This is a really vitally important quote. This is from the very first chapter of the Suen. The name of the chapter is the Shanggu Tianzhen Lun, which means the truth of heaven, the heaven's truth as passed down from very ancient times. Shanggu means high antiquity or very ancient times. And this is, so for those of you who are not familiar with the Neijing is written mostly as a question-answer session between Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, and usually his physician/teacher, Qibo. There's some other characters, but usually it's Qibo. This is the very first question that's asked in the entire text, which means this is probably one of the most important questions we need to consider within Chinese medicine. So the Yellow Emperor asks the heavenly teacher, which is Qibo. He says, I've heard that people of high antiquity, so people like in the good old days, and remember it's 2,000 years ago, they're talking about the good old days already. So in the good old days, in the sequence of their spring and autumn, basically over the course of their life, they all exceeded 100 years. But in their movements and activities, there was no weakening, right? So not only did they live 100 years, but they were healthy and strong for 100 years. It's not like they lived for 50 years and then they were, you know, in bed with some sort of severe disease for the last 50 where they couldn't move. They were healthy and strong for 100 years. But here's the but. As for people of today, after half of 100 years, the movements and activities of all of them weaken. I'm already past half of 100 years, so you know, we don't like this kind of statement, but that's for people of today. Is this because the times are different, or is it that people have lost this ability, right? And most of us probably know the answer. It's one of those questions where we really know where the Yellow Emperor is leading us. It's not necessarily because the times are different. He's going to suggest, or Qibo is going to suggest, that it's maybe with us, which is actually better news. Why is it better news? Because it doesn't mean that the longevity of the ancient people is never attainable again, because the times are different. It means that we can today, in modern times, whether it's modern times 2,000 years ago or modern times now, we can live as the ancients lived, right? We can live the way that the Yellow Emperor is saying those people used to do it, and still get that longevity today if we try for it. So here's the answer. So Qibo said, here's his answer. He said, the people of high antiquity, they knew the Tao, right? So, and the Tao is the way. And what that word means, we could easily spend, you know, we could spend a semester on what does the word Tao mean. But suffice it to say that the Tao is the big, big, big everything at the very least. Now, Qibo is an enlightened sage. So he says, okay, they knew the Tao. That's really the answer. And you can see Huangdi scratching his head. And Qibo was a benevolent sage. So he said, okay, clearly you're not understanding what I'm saying. So okay, here we go. The next line, they modeled their behavior on yin and yang, right? So yin and yang, that's the Tao. In the commentary on the I Ching, it says yi yin, yi yang, chi wei Tao. One yin and one yang, that's the Tao. So how do we understand the Tao? How do we understand that which is that which is so big, that which is the universe, the sum total of creation, we have to understand it through some sort of logical theory that we can make sense of things. And the first and foremost logical theory in Chinese medicine, in Chinese tradition, and Chinese philosophy is yin and yang. Now, yin and yang is maybe not so easy. Maybe it's easy, it looks easy, but maybe not quite so easy. So Chibo sees Huangdi scratching his head, say, well, what is that? What do you mean yin and yang? What does that quite mean? So he goes on and he says, they complied with the arts and the calculations, which then refers to things like 5 phases, the use of numbers as symbols to understand more complex relationships between yin and yang and the 5 phases. And then the quote that I didn't give you after that is that, or maybe I did give it to you. No, I didn't give you the next quote. The quote after that, if you go back and look at the Suen, he basically says, all right, you still don't understand what I'm saying? Here's what they did. They didn't eat too much. They didn't eat too little. They rested when it was appropriate. They didn't work too much. They didn't work too little. They basically lived their lives the way they should in relationship to these theories, right? That's the big principle. And that's what we eventually have to bring down to something that's more clinically meaningful in specific. So let's talk about that. So one of the ways we do this is through seasonal harmonization. And these and other time-based methods of disease prevention and treatment, these have always been from the very beginning an important part of these nourishing life trends, these Yangsheng trends. So in Chinese, we have these kinds of sayings, Tian Di Ren, so heaven, earth, and humans are in harmony, or heaven and humanity unite as one. What does that mean? That we exist within a natural environment, and it's very simple. When we resonate with the natural environment, then we are more likely to be in a state of health. When we go against the natural environment, right, then we have a harder time, right? So to some extent, the principle is very basic, then it's how do we apply it? So this is another important quote. This is from the 74th chapter of the Suen. It's one of my favorite quotes, so I always throw it in my lectures. Heaven and earth constitute the great principle, and a person's Shen spirit penetrates and reflects it. So how do we understand to stay healthy? We look at the basic principle of everything. The basic principle in the theoretical terms is yin and yang. In practical terms, it's the movement of the cosmos. It's heaven and earth. In my day-to-day activity, it's what does it look like outside? Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? Is it rainy? Is it dry? Is it hot? Is it cold? Because that's the expression of yin and yang, of heaven and earth, that I can touch on a day-to-day basis. And then my Shen spirit penetrate that. So this word tong, penetrates, means also being in communication with. And the word ing, it's the second to last character there. So you can see the cursor, that's tong and that's ing. The word ing means to reflect, to be a mirror image of, or to resonate with, right? So not only am I in connection with it, but I'm in resonance with it. Now, why our Shen spirit penetrates it and not my body is a discussion for us to have over dim sum. So if someone wants to join me in Chinatown for dim sum, we can have that discussion in person eventually. The invitation is always out there. All right, so let's look at even more specifics. So the Neijing actually, after it gives us all these grand philosophical discussions, it does give us some more practical models for 4-season health maintenance. But the way we understand this, it's not just learning a couple of tricks. It's not just, oh, take this formula in spring because it's empirical. Run away from anyone who says empirical, because there has to be a theory that underlies everything. I don't understand why everything works, but I know that I don't understand why everything works, but I know there's a reason why everything works, right? So the reason why all of the seasonal transformation works, the reason why our lifestyle fits in or doesn't fit in with the seasonal flux, is because it's predicated on the understanding of the movement of the 5 phases as the seasons. Everyone get that basic idea? We're going to come back to this diagram shortly, so don't worry about that diagram quite yet. So, and the Neijing is very clear that this is an important thing. So this is an interesting quote. This is from the 9th chapter of the Suen. So here, the quote is, the 5 days is called an atmospheric manifestation. So this is called a Ho. The 3 Ho, these 5-day periods of time, are called a seasonal node. The six nodes, the six qi are called a season, and the 4 seasons are called a year. Now, what does this mean? That means that the seasons are actually not only just the 4 seasons. So we have the 4 basic seasons, right? We have spring, summer, autumn, winter. Each of those seasons can be broken down into 6 smaller segments that are about 15 days long each. And we'll do a very brief introduction to those closer to the end. Each of those 15-day periods of time can also be broken down into 5-day mini seasons. They're mini seasons. And what the next part of the quote says is that each of them follows what is responsible for governing it. And according to the commentary by Wang Bing, this means that every time period is associated with the qi of the 5 phases that is associated with that time period. And now we're going to look at those sort of specifics. Even before we look at the specifics, let's do that. So the Suen is also adamant that this is an important concept. This is from Suen chapter 9. And this quote said, thus it is said, he who does not know what a year, basically what time, contributes to human health, how the qi abounds and weakens, and why repletion or vacuity arise, they cannot serve as a practitioner of medicine. So if you really want to be a good physician, you got to understand how the seasons work and how they play a part in our patient's disease and our own personal wellness. This is from Suen chapter 13. Just in case you didn't believe me, the Suen thought this was really important. It goes on to say, when later generations treated a disease, then this was different. The treatments were not based on the 4 seasons. They no longer knew of the significance of sun and moon. They did not recognize whether the qi moved contrary to or followed its regular course. So in ancient times, it means that this is all taken into consideration. Maybe we can come back and do a meetup on moon and sun and other kinds of considerations of weather patterns for treatment as well. Okay, let's talk more specifically about the seasons now. This is a very important quote from this 44th chapter of the Ling Shu. Huangdi says, I hope to hear about the qi of the 4 seasons, and then Qibo replies, and this next sentence is repeated several times throughout the Neijing, and it's a really, really important way of understanding what the seasons really are representing. Qibo says the spring engenders. The spring gives us the birth of sheng, of growth. So for example, those of you who practice herbs probably know herbs like shengjiang or shengdihuang, right? So the word sheng means fresh or alive. In Chinese, a birthday is the shengre. So it's that birthing, that fresh, that new, from the beginning kind of movement. That's the movement of spring. Then it goes on to say that summer flourishes. So summer is the utmost of growth, right? Makes sense. We all know this, at least on some very intuitive level as Chinese medicine practitioners. Autumn is the movement of harvesting in. Then winter is the movement of cang, storage. And interestingly, in classical Chinese, the word cang and the word zang, organ, are the same character. Modern Chinese, they're slightly different. Right? They rewrote, they added a little extra piece to the character to mean a zang organ. But in classical times, the same word for storage is the same word for zang organ, exactly the same character. So this is the movement of winter. Why? Because winter is hibernation. Now, those are the movements of the seasons, which basically correspond to wood, fire, metal, and water, right? So wood is this birthing, everything coming up and out. That's springtime. Fire is the biggest expansive outward moving. That's why the heart is fire, because heart is the organ responsible for consciousness in our body, right? It's the one that goes out to interact with everything else more than anything else, because consciousness goes out to interact with everything else. Metal is the movement of drawing in. That's why the lungs draw things down and in. And that's harvesting. And then storage is winter. That's water phase, which is why it's exemplified by the kidneys, which should be the ultimate type of storage. Get the idea? Now, the quote goes on to say, this is the constant, 是气之常也. This is the constant of qi. So it's not just the seasons, this is the constant of the movement of all the vitality, the breath of the universe, as well as the breath of life within my body. And humans, people also respond to this movement. And it's the same character there. Ing means to be in resonance with. So this movement happens out there. Because it happens out there, it happens in my body as well, right? That's so years ago when I was quite young, must have been when I was my first year of college or somewhere around then, I had a friend who played sitar. Fantastic instrument, great. And so he always wanted to learn saxophone. My undergraduate degree was in music at Oberlin Conservatory. I was a saxophone primary player. So he said, teach me saxophone for a couple months, I'll teach you sitar. I said, excellent, let's do it. And the fun thing about the sitar is it has all these big strings that you pluck. There's all these other strings underneath that are little, smaller, thinner strings you never touch. But what happens is when you pluck the big string, the sound wave makes the smaller strings vibrate also. So it gives us this excellent sort of background sound. That's us. The season is the big string and our bodies are the little strings. The seasons pluck winter and my body tries to resonate with winter, or I try to resonate with winter. And if I do, then we're in harmony, then we're in health. If I don't, then that's problematic. So this is the diagram. This is the master diagram of all you need to know in Chinese medicine as far as I'm concerned. So here on this side, we have spring engenders, right? This is the movement of springtime. This is the movement of summer. Summer flourishes, so it's the ultimate of yang. This is autumn harvests, and this is winter store, right? So here we have things, yang is expanding outwards because life is yang, life is warm, life is active. And here on this side, we're contracting inwards. So the line here is on a slight angle for purpose because down here where we have winter storage, this is midnight. This is winter solstice. What happens at winter solstice is we have that the switch goes in the opposite direction. So the darkest day, the longest night, the very next day, just a little more light, just a little more sunlight, that's yang coming back. And we keep on going until we get to summer solstice, right? Summer solstice is the longest day, and the very next day just gets a little darker. That's the birth of yin again. And right now we're sort of smack dab on this side because we're coming right up on the equinox. So we're really close to the spring equinox at this point. So we're almost at that balance point of yin and yang. So we have the most yin, most yang, and now we're sort of in between in the balance. Okay, so let's talk about the specifics of the seasons, just to give us a more concrete idea of that. So this is spring. The definition for spring is to push. This is a definition from a book called the Shuoenjian. This is a roughly about, imagine the Oxford English Unabridged Dictionary, except it's in Chinese and it's 2,000 years old. That's what we're talking about in terms of books. So why does this mean to push? Because it means we're pushing up and out of storage, basically the hibernation, a seed state, into life. It's the beginning of everything. And in this ancient character, this is an ancient version of the character for spring, these things appear are plants, and this is the sun. Why? Because the sun is coming back, it's warming the earth, and that's starting to get things to just start pushing up and out. That's the movement, that's wood, that's the movement of spring. So the question is, how do we resonate with that movement of spring? So here we have Suan chapter 2 on spring. It says the 3 months of spring denote a fusion and spreading. Heaven and earth generate life, and the 10,000 things flourish, right? That's spring. Everything is starting to come back. Everything is starting to come to life again. Go to rest late at night and rise early. Move through the courtyard with long strides. In other words, just go out and walk around, start moving a little bit more, dishevel the hair and relax one's behavior. So it's not only what we do physically, it's how we sort of attend to life in general through our mind state as well. And thereby cause the mind to orient itself on life. Then it goes on to say, this is in resonance with the qi of spring and is the Tao of nourishing that movement of birth and or growth. Opposing it harms the liver. In summer, this causes changes to cold, and there is little to support growth. Right? So what is this? What does some of this mean, basically? We have to understand what does spring represent? If spring is wood phase, if spring is that birth of everything coming up and out, it's giving us some practical examples of how do we do that with our bodies, right? So because spring is wood, wood and fire are relatively more yang, metal and water are yin, right? This wood is coming up and out, fire is definitely yang, metal is coming down and in, that's yin, and water is hibernation, that's yin. So wood is the beginning movement of yang. That means movement. That means everything waking up. What's one of the best ways to wake up? Start moving, right? So the first thing the Neijing tells us is, after it says you can sleep a little less, why can we sleep a little less? Because we're trying to be more active. There's more sunlight coming back. But we should actually get up and start moving our body. Now, we can see this as a specific recommendation for spring. So spring, we should start getting outside. Right now is the time that's it's a little warmer today. It wasn't warmer yesterday or the day before. As it's getting warmer, we want to get outside. We want to start moving our bodies. So this can be taken literally in springtime, or we know in Chinese medicine, all of these theories can be taken on many levels. So we can also take this as a figurative description of what else is springtime represent. So one of the other things that springtime represents is, for example, in terms of time of day, early morning hours. So what's the appropriate thing to do in the morning is get up, start moving around, stretch a little bit, get the body moving. That starts waking us up, right? So hitting the gym right before bed is probably not the best time to hit the gym if you have the option of hitting the gym in the morning, right? Because right before bed, it's time for us to go into storage. We don't want to start being as active and moving as much as we possibly can because we're putting our body in a movement that's contrary to the movement of the time of day. Get the idea? So one of the things we do in springtime is we want to get more physical movement happening. Now we can think, what does this mean in terms of acupuncture, herbal medicine? So a little bit later on, we're going to look at some specific, for example, acupuncture recommendations for this time of year. One of the things we can start doing with our patients that mimics this is start doing points that have more of a moving and coursing quality. Get the idea? So moving can be, yeah, physically, let's move our bodies more. But that also means when we're approaching patients, assuming that they don't have a condition that's contrary to getting them moving, right? In general, this might be more time to say, okay, we want to give you foods that get the qi moving a little better. We want to do some acupuncture protocol that get the qi moving a little better. Start getting everything coursing, and so like liver, right? That's why liver is this time of year. So again, this is actually what do we do to stay healthy, but also what can we do clinically to get our patients to resonate more with the movement of springtime. Okay. Let's talk about summer, right? So use the same idea to think about how can we understand things, not only in terms of what do we do in the clinic, but how do we work our lives. So here it says the 3 months of summer denote opulence and blossoming. The qi of heaven interact, and the 10,000 things bear fruit. Go to rest late at night and rise early. Never get enough of the sun. Cause the qi to flow away as if that what you loved were located on the outside. So this is the time to really be active, right? You want to go on vacation, want to go on a trip, summer is a good time to do it. Summer is not the time to sit at home and read books and sit by the fire. It's a time to get out and do things. So this then, like we saw with spring, is in resonance with the qi of summer and is the Tao to nourish that movement of ultimate growth, of expansive movement. Opposing it harms the heart. In autumn, this causes jia and malaria, so intermittent fever diseases. Why intermittent fever? Because summer is yang, summer is fire. What is metal? Metal in autumn are things going inside. If we don't do the thing we're supposed to do in one season, then by the next season, it sort of screws up the movement of qi and blood. So why does it cause intermittent fevers? Because the yang is not going inside. It can't go inside. Maybe it's coming back out. there's not enough yang. So you can't quite decide what to do. So you feel hot, you don't feel hot. You feel hot, you don't feel hot. Because the movement going back down and in is compromised because we didn't have the movement right before happening appropriately. And then it goes on to say there's little to support gathering and multiple diseases develop at winter solstice, right? So if we don't wake up, then going back into hibernation becomes problematic. If we don't go into hibernation, then we don't have enough stored vitality to wake up again. So everything in terms of health is dependent on the cycling. So again, what does this mean in terms of activity? So getting out and moving more, we can get a little less sleep. So think of this not only in terms of times of year or times of the day, but even in terms of the relative state of a person's overall health or a person's age, right? When you were in the summer of your life, when you're in your 20s and everything is as young and active as you possibly can, pulling an all-nighter is easier than pulling an all-nighter when you're 40 years old, when you're starting to maybe begin autumn. Why? Because you have more yang, you have more vitality at that time. Likewise, if you're relatively healthy, everything is, so think about course of a disease, beginning of disease, middle of disease, end of a disease, in terms of my life force. If we are perfectly healthy, I'm in a state of adequate yang, we're in the state of summer, I can get a little less rest and I'm okay. If I'm in a state of recovery from disease and my qi is in a state of being inadequate, I have to put myself in winter and sleep more and store more. Get the idea? So again, it's not only, we can take this, so it's actually, it's sort of, it's marketing to say seasons, come talk about seasons. Because when we talk about seasons, we still talk about everything. Every time we talk about Chinese medicine, we still talk about everything. Okay, let's look at autumn. The 3 months of autumn denote taking in balance. Go to rest early, but you can get up early. So we're not completely yin, but we're not really yang anymore. So we can still get up, move around in the morning, but at night we have to start getting to bed a little earlier. We have to start moving inwards more, which means not only, we'll see with the next quote, not only from a physical standpoint, but also a psycho-emotional standpoint. So it says, get up together with the chicken, which means you still can get up early. Collect your spirit and cause the autumn qi to be balanced. Do not direct your mind to the outside and cause the lung qi to be clear. So Wang Bing says, collecting the spirit means avoid agitation and desire, those which harm and balance the qi of autumn. Why? Because agitation and desire, agitation, anger, which organ does that go with? Liver, means going out. I don't want to do that. I want to sort of bring things more in. That's why grief is the emotion of autumn. Why? Because grief is a moving inwards, right? And grief, if you think about grief, because nothing is pure good or pure bad. So the grief is how we experience things in a way that's painful for us. The flip side of grief is nostalgia, right? So nostalgia is longing for the past, but in a way that brings solace or brings happiness to us, right? Oh, I remember that person, in a way that doesn't make me feel drained, feel sad. Get the idea? But it's still sort of looking inwards and looking backwards. That's the movement of metal. So we want to stay more inwards. This is why in many traditional cultures, holidays where we have introspection, right? So within the Jewish tradition, the Day of Atonement, this is in autumn. Or Thanksgiving, we're going back and sort of reflecting on the previous year and giving thanks for what we've harvested, literally harvested in. Those are autumn holidays. So the movement of autumn is not only get a little more rest, right? You don't have to sort of be as active, stay inside a little more, but also it's do that emotionally as well. Winter, okay, so obviously, if you do this, this is in resonance with the qi of autumn and the Tao of nourishing, the movement of gathering in. Opposing it harms the lungs, and that's not good, because in winter, we're gonna have all sorts of problems. The last season is winter. So the character for winter, this is one of the archaic characters for winter in Chinese. This circle, the dot in the middle, is the sun. So what is the winter? It's basically a bottle turned upside down, the sun stuck up inside of it. So what does that mean is the sun goes into a place of hiding and storage, which is an apt description for winter. It becomes the darkest season of the year. So the winter denotes securing and storing, right? Dang, everything is sort of in hibernation. The water is frozen and the earth breaks open. Do not disturb the yang, go to rest early and rise late. This is the time to sort of really be literally in hibernation as much as we can. You must wait for the sun to shine, right? So this, it's now that we did the time change, my pets are more in tune with nature than I am. So we're waking up early enough, it's still dark. The last person down the stairs in the morning these days is the dog. Because he's looking at like, why are you people up? It's not time to get up yet. We have to sleep a little more. He's much more in tune with nature than the rest of us are, because we're slaves to the clock. Kids got to get to school. I got to get to see patients at the right time. Got to get up early. But in the winter, especially, the idea was less sun, less activity, more rest, more moving inwards, more sleeping, more hibernation. Then this is really interesting, because this talks about the psycho-emotional presentation of winter. Let the mind enter a state as if hidden, as if shut in, as if you had secret intentions, as if you already had made gains. And this is a commentary by Zhang Shichun, who is early 20th century, very influential author. And this is quote, this is an excellent article if you want to read an article on longevity. So I gave you the website. This is one of Heiner Fruhauf's articles. So the quote from Zhang Shichun says, this quote means the process of enticing the heart fire to move downwards. As if you had secret intentions refers to the process of enticing the heart fire downwards to mate with the kidney, which produces a sensation of pleasure and fulfillment. The words already had made gains refers to the process of prolonged accumulation of true yang in the lower dantian. What is he talking about? He's talking about like meditation. This is the time to sit and do meditation, or do qigong, where it's stillness qigong practices. So again, this is the movement of winter. The way we put ourselves in the movement of winter is by these kinds of activities. And we also want to avoid cold, seek warmth. Why? Because too much cold harms my inner qi, my vitality, my yang qi. And this is in resonance with the qi of winter, and it's the Tao of nourishing that movement of storage. Opposing it harms the kidneys. In spring, this causes limpness with receding qi. Basically, you have lack of ability to move the body, and there's little to support generation or growth, right? So basically, the take-home idea, of course, is we always want to do what we can in each season so as to support the movement of the next thing along the cycle. Right? That's the big picture. That's how do we apply the idea of yin and yang with the 5 phases to the seasons, right? So again, what do we have? We have winter being the movement of water. Autumn being the movement, you all know this, I'm not going to scroll through it, it takes too long to scroll. Autumn being the movement of metal. Water and metal are yin. They are moving down and in. Metal is the beginning of that movement of yin. Water is the ultimate of storage. So autumn and winter are that time of year to do that activity. The opposite are spring and summer, which are the movement of yang, the movement of wood and fire. That's everything expanding outwards. And then by now someone's asking, where's Earth? Earth then becomes the middle of everything. So if you go back and look at that diagram, in the middle, there's a Chinese character that says hua, which means transformation. So Earth is the glue that holds it all together, which is why in many ways of arranging the 5 phases, we sometimes see the north, south, east, west seasons as a compass with Earth in the middle. So Earth then becomes the transition that allows everything to move as it appropriately should move. Okay. So let's look at some more quotes and then we'll look at some more specifics. This is another excellent quote from the second chapter of the Suen. It says, hence the sages in spring and summer nourish the yang. Right. So this is Chunsha Yang Yang. So in spring and summer, they nourish the yang. In Qiudong Yang Yin. In autumn and winter, they nourish the yin. Now, this doesn't mean in winter you should take yin tonics and summer you should take yang tonics, right? What this means, if you can see, this is a Ma Yuantai, who's a very important Suen commentator. He says, the myriad beings come to life in spring, grow in summer, gathered in autumn, and are stored in winter. These regularities of yin and yang in the course of the 4 seasons are the root and source of the myriad beings. Hence, in spring and summer, those sages who adhered to the Tao of nourishing their genesis and growth, they nourished yang qi. While in autumn and winter, those who adhered to the Tao of nourishing their gathering and storage nourished their yin qi. So when it says nourish the yang, it means you do things that put yourself into a state of yang, expansion, growth, activity. Nourishing yin, again, doesn't mean you take shu di huang all winter long. It means you move in a way in your activity, in your mind state, in how you sleep. You do it in a way that moves our body into more of a yin state, right? So this quote is how we live our lives, how we eat, how we sleep, how we exercise, not let's take herbs that are yin or herbs that are yang. Get the idea? All right. Now let's talk more specifics. So the next thing we'll talk about briefly is a short introduction to the concept of the seasonal nodes, right? And I blog, usually I'm pretty regular, but I blog fairly regularly on the topic of seasonal nodes. So if you want to see, you can go back for a couple of years and see my blog posts. As I said before, we have 4 seasons in the year, but each season can be broken down into 6 mini seasons of about 15 days of length each. And why? Because let's be honest, early spring, we're actually in mid-spring. Early spring in the Chinese calendar is February, because that's the beginning of the days are getting longer, right? By the beginning of February, we're 6 weeks away from the equinox. So in the Chinese tradition, February, March, April are spring, May, June, and July are summer, August, September, October are autumn. So even though it's hot in autumn, if you live in the burbs like I do and you have to mow your lawn, you'll notice the grass doesn't grow nearly as fast in autumn as it does in May. Why? Because things are starting to slow down. The days are getting shorter. So August, September, October are autumn. November, December, January are winter in the traditional calendar. Now, we all know that February is not the same as April in terms of weather. So to say that February, March, and April is all spring is not quite enough in terms of specificity. So we can break down those 3 months into 6 smaller segments, roughly 2 each month. That gives us an idea of how early spring might be different from middle or late spring. And those are the seasonal nodes. The seasonal nodes are actually based on the movement of the sun, and what this is the ecliptic, which is the apparent position of the sun over the sort of the course of the sky. The vernal equinox is set at 0 degrees, autumn equinox is 180, and then the solstices are in between. If you're not familiar with the idea of the ecliptic, I'm sure there's a Wikipedia article on it. You can go read that a little bit later. So let's look, since we're in spring now, let's look at some of the spring seasonal nodes and how we can go that big picture concepts of the five phases in yin and yang, how we can bring it down into more specifics. So the beginning of spring usually is around, this year was February 4th, it's usually around February 4th or 5th each year. The smaller segments of that spring, remember of that beginning of spring. So beginning of spring is the name of a 15-day period of time that starts in early February. And remember what the quote from the Suen said is that each of those segments, and there are 24 of these segments every year, can be broken down into 3 5-day periods of time. So there are 72 5-day periods of time every year. They're mini seasons. And they all have really fun names. So the 3 mini seasons of the beginning of spring are the east wind liberates from icy shackles, excellent name. hibernating insects begin to stir, and the fish rise up to the ice. So clearly it's still cold, there's still ice, but the beginning of life is just happening. So what are some of the traditional recommendations for the beginning of spring? One of them is combing therapy. So combing therapy is literally with a comb, where you can take your fingers and do this. So I tell my patients, every morning you get up, you start doing this. You can count 100 times, whatever, or more or less. Why do we do combing therapy? If we look at the body now, the body we can also break down into yin and yang, right? Distal is yang, proximal is yin. Back is yang, front is yin. Top is yang, bottom is yin, right? So by combing or stimulating the scalp, this is yang, Bai Hui, that 100 meetings where all those channels sort of meet up there. This is stimulating the surface and the yang areas of the body to start encouraging the movement of qi more actively in order to put us in that resonance with spring. So we want to do therapies, acupuncture, diet that encourages that growth of yang qi in the body just at the beginning of it. And we want to be sure we avoid exposure to wind and too much cold. Why? Because even though the yang is starting to move out, the outside environment is still windy and cold potentially in February. So this means that, again, more specific, we're trying to consume foods that help maintain normal liver function. Why? Because liver is this beginning of movement up and out, especially the yang of the liver. So we can eat things like scallions, leeks, chives, cilantro, garlic, foods that have a slightly spicy, you don't need to eat chili peppers, but slightly acrid flavor that gets things moving in the body. For those of you who are, I know some of you here have studied with me before, I practice mostly the Dong style of acupuncture, and we have a Dong recipe from Master Dong himself. He said we can use it this season. We do beef cooked with garlic, treats liver weakness. So why does it treat liver weakness? Two aspects. Beef nourishes blood, right? So that's the liver aspect of storage. But since this is springtime, we don't want to create only storage. We want to get things moving as well. So we can create something that builds liver blood with something that actually moves the qi and blood inside, warm and spicy, garlic. You could also do like beef liver with onions would be, my grandfather used to love beef liver with onions. That's a perfect early spring dish because it's nourishing, but also moving at the same time. Get the idea? That's early spring. Early spring, we want to just start the moving process, but without draining too much. In terms of acupuncture, we can use, for example, in Dong's acupuncture, we have a point group called the metacarpal 3 needles. This is basically needling in the area of large intestine 4. Excuse me. So we can put, Tom, you can edit out a little later on, edit out me choking. All right. So in Dong's acupuncture, we'll start again. So in Dong's acupuncture, we have a point group that's in the vicinity of large intestine 4. This is a combination of large intestine 3, large intestine 4, and lingu. So lingu, most of us probably know this point. It's large intestine 4 is close to the metacarpal junction as we can go. And this is basically the 4 gates on steroids, right? Because it just gets things moving. So in Dong's acupuncture, we frequently say that each of the long bones is a little microsystem of the body. So right here we have, this is a metacarpal, it's not long, but it's tubular. So the tubular bones are microsystems. So here we have upper jiao, middle jiao, lower jiao. So by needling 1, 2, 3 needles along here, we can course the qi and blood in the entire body. And we can also use this together with points like liver 3 to create a version of the 4 gates that just moves qi and blood in the entire body. So in terms of acupuncture, we're thinking of points that have this general moving effect, like the 4 gates, or any other point that has this sort of general moving and coursing effect on the qi and blood of the whole body. Now, the flip side of that is if people who have chronic liver fire, right? So we know that even in winter, patients can still have liver fire. Because the movement in springtime is yang coming up and out, if the patient has chronic liver fire, they have to be careful so that that fire doesn't flare more than it did during the colder months of winter, because that's the time when it might do that. So a traditional, very simple, like herbal/dietary remedy for this time of year is yin shen hao with da zao. So what this can do is benefit the qi. It generates fluids because we have the da zao, and protects the liver because the da zao can protect liver blood. So here patients can, the traditional remedy, this is with raw herbs. So you place these ingredients in 2.5 cups of water, bring to a boil and reduce and simmer. Then you can separate into 2 doses, or you can give it to them as granular concentrates, right? I gave you the traditional raw herbs, but oftentimes in my clinic, for example, we use granular concentrates more frequently. So this is, for those of you who practice Dong's acupuncture, these are some point recommendations if patients have liver fire. So if patients tend to be more cold and stuck, right? Patients tend to be a little bit more deficient. We want to start getting things up and moving. That's when we use points that course the qi and blood of the whole body. If patients already tend towards the opposite, they tend towards liver repletion, then we want to be careful that they don't become too replete as yang is expanding outwards. And then we can use points that have a beneficial effect on clearing liver fire and coursing liver at the same time. So in Dong's acupuncture, these would be points like mu yen. Mu yen, yen means inflammation. So wood inflammation, or gan men, which means liver gate. So mu yen's on the finger, you see the diagram there. Liver gates on the forearm. If you don't know Dong's acupuncture, you can use TCM points like liver 2, right? Liver 2 is the fire point on the liver to help clear and course the liver. Get the idea? So depending on where the patient is, we want to bring them back to balance. If they're stuck in early spring, we want to get them to move. If they're already moving too much, the movement of spring, because it's yang, will get them moving even more in the too much direction. So we want to sort of crank that back down a little bit. So another dietary recommendation for early spring, this is a great one. This is pork bone and red date soup. This also has the ability to sort of nourish the blood, nourish the liver, but notice we're also adding herbs like ginger, scallion. You could throw garlic in there as well if you like, so as to keep things moving. So it's a similar idea to the beef liver with, so if you don't eat liver anymore, that's okay. You can make bone broth, but bone broth with some red dates to nourish the blood, but something that's also acrid and moving. Ginger, if you like garlic instead, do garlic. You can do both. Scallions, onions, just to keep things moving at the same time. Let's skip ahead to awakening of insects. This is the seasonal node that we're in right now. So if you want to read about the second seasonal node, you can go to my blog. It's always up there. But this is where we are now. This is awakening of insects. And around us, I'm starting to get things, because we had a particularly warm winter this year, at least here in the Northeast of the United States. Bulbs are starting to come up. In my office, I always say that nature starts invading. We have little bugs and small little ants we start seeing right about now because they're starting to really get up and start moving. So literally, this is awakening of insects. The 3 5-day mini seasons right about now are called peach trees begin to blossom, the orioles sing, and the hawks transform into cuckoos. I love those names, right? So at this time of year, again, yang is starting to grow even more. So what we want to do is protect that movement of yang qi coming up and out. That goes back to the quote we saw before: in spring and summer, nourish the yang. We can do that with more activity, like we saw earlier on. So physical activity is both good for getting the body moving, but it also is good for reducing stress, right? So we know one of the reasons why runners love to run is because it gives them this sort of like endorphin high, and they feel de-stressed from it. When we went back to the original quote from Sue in chapter 2, it says you want to chill out in springtime. You don't want to be too stressed out. Why? Because that irritates the liver. Being relaxed, right? That's the definition of xiaoyao, free and easy wanderer. So the formula Xiao Yao San is a reference to a quote from the Zhuangzi, where basically Zhuangzi, this early Chinese philosopher, says life should be like an easy walk through the forest. That's how relaxed we should be. That's the movement of springtime. That's good. Movement, but relaxed movement. Why? Because tense movement creates stagnation. Stagnation harms the yang, because the yang means movement. So engaging in physical activity not only physically moves the body, but it can also have a stress relieving effect as well. Get the idea? Another thing we can start encouraging patients to do is paida. Paida literally means slapping and smacking, or slapping and hitting. And this is potement, right? Tapping. So I do weekly Qigong classes online. It's my pandemic service to my, originally it was for my patients, but my students, the greater Chinese medicine community. So if anyone wants to join us for free Qigong classes on Monday and Friday afternoons, shoot me an email later. I can add you to the list. One of the things that we've been teaching people to do lately, and we do oftentimes, is tapping. It's an easy thing. You can give it to patients as homework. Patients love homework. And every time they do it, I tell them, you'll be thinking of me when you do it, because they do. So it's a good patient retention technique as well. Teach them to tap along the channels. Patients love basic PCM theory. So what do you do? We know that yin channels go this way, yang channels go that way. So tap in the direction of the yin channels, then tap in the direction of the yang channels. Do each arm 3 or 4 times, then the legs, tap down the back of the legs, tap up the inside of the legs, right? This is tapping in the direction of the channels, gets the channels moving, gets things woken up. People have numbness or stiffness in the morning, tap. Get the idea? So this is paida. You don't have to tap too hard, but you're just tapping enough just to stimulate that circulation up and down. So this is an excellent exercise for this time of year. Diet, again, we want to keep things moving. So warming foods, slightly spicy foods, leeks, chives, scallions, small amount of alcohol. Why? Because alcohol is warming and spicy, warming and acrid. Obviously, for some patients who can't have alcohol, don't make that recommendation. But for others, I have a really nice bottle of California Cabernet Sauvignon waiting for me for after this lecture, because it's spring. I have to do it. So a little alcohol also is spicing and warming, gets things moving. We can increase white noodles in soups, mainly because the wheat husk, the bran, is slightly cooling. So the whole grains are better in the summer because they have a slightly cooling nature. The white noodles, for example, have more warming, slightly warming nature. So that warms and supplements the qi. A traditional dish for this time of year is shensai amaranth greens. This is one of my favorite Chinese greens. This is the time of year we can start seeing it in the supermarkets. Another good green for this time of year is tonghao. Tonghao is edible chrysanthemum greens. They're just slightly spicy. If you can get them, it's also great. And like everything else, we can cook with a little ginger, a little garlic, because this starts getting things moving. Acupuncture, similar to what we saw previously, points that have a moving quality, Lingu, Dabai, are in the vicinity of large intestine 4. We can also, because the middle burner is particularly susceptible to too much cold, and the middle burner doesn't like up and down cold, right? So if you really want to mess your stomach up, have like an ice cold. Don't actually do this, but just imagine, have an ice cold beverage and then follow with a nice warm cup of tea. Your stomach's not going to be happy. The hot and cold all at the same time does not make stomachs happy. So because of that, as we have this fluctuation of heat and cold, we can do some points in the clinic that gently protect the spleen and stomach. So Si Hua Shang means the upper 4 flowers in Dong's acupuncture. This point is the same as Du San Li, stomach 36. So points that move, but also points that protect the spleen and stomach because of the up and down nature. In February, it's more likely to just be cold. By March now, up and down in terms of hot and cold. We're seeing that yesterday versus today. So since that places a burden on the digestive system, we want to keep the digestive system happy. So let's talk about vernal equinox, because that's the next that's the next seasonal node that's coming up. Usually this happens on March 21st, 22nd. I think this year it actually might be March 22nd. I have to check the calendar, but it's coming up in the next week. The three mini seasons that go with vernal equinox are the swallows arrive, birds are coming back, right? Thunder starts resounding. Why? Thunder is a symbol of yang, and the beginning of lightning, also a symbol of yang. So what should we do? Work on the liver. We want to both clear the liver and supplement. So clear means making sure it's not too hot, making sure that it's moving smoothly, keep the supplementation happening. Why? Because we're still building yang, and we want to avoid the extremes of the 7 affects. So keep still relaxed, not stressed out, not too much up and down in the emotions, and overdoing bedroom activity. So bedroom activity. Why do we want to avoid overdoing bedroom activity? Because that taxes the internal chi, that taxes the yang, right? So a little bit is good. Want to keep things moving. Don't want things to become stuck, but we don't want to overdo things. So diet, mildly spicy foods, again, ginger, scallions, this is the same. If patients tend more towards deficiency pattern, then we want to also, because this is the time for liver, give foods that can help build, especially things like liver blood. So slightly sour foods, such as pickles or vinegar, will hold on to things. If patients tend to be stuck, or if they have dampness or heat, you don't want sour. You want things moving. If patients tend to be deficient, you want to help them hold on to things like blood, which is slightly sour foods. A good tea for this time of year is Meiguihua tea. The Meiguihua tea is the rosebud, right? So rosebud. Rosebud, why? Because it's mildly moving, it's slightly sweet, but also helps with building blood. Okay. Sorry, I'm stuck. There you go. So acupuncture, we have a couple possibilities. If people tend towards liver depression, in other words, stagnation, we want to do points that move stagnation, right? So again, points like the 4 gates. If you do Dong's acupuncture, the metacarpal 3 needles. Ren Huang is the human emperor. That's the same as Sainin Jiao, spleen 6, because that also moves things. If patients tend towards heat, you don't want heat to become stagnant. As the yang is getting more and more and more, then the possibility of patients, if they have heat already, and if they're stuck, they're not moving enough, then heat can also become stagnant, in which case we can do things like bleed the ura apex. If patients are deficient, especially of liver blood, then we want to do points that have this holding and building effect on liver blood. So in Dong's acupuncture, this means points like the upper 3 yellows. If TCM acupuncture, spleen 6, or liver 8, because liver 8 is the water point on liver, which means it's the supplementation point of the liver channel. Remember, we supplement the mother, drain the child. So water is the mother of wood. So liver 8 is the point to do for building liver blood, holding on to liver. Okay. If you want a traditional recipe, stir-fried pig kidney with eukomia with duzhong. This is for more of our deficient patients, right? Not for our excess patients. For the patients, if they're deficient, because everything is coming up and moving, if they don't have enough qi and blood to move, you need to give more qi and blood to move. So this would be for building liver blood this time of year. So you can read the instructions on how to cook it yourself a little bit later. I want to leave some time. So you can go ahead and read through the Qingming, which is the 5th of the seasonal nodes that starts in the beginning of April. But I just want you to start getting the main idea. The most important thing is getting the main idea. But let's go through this so you can we'll leave some more time for questions. But before we do that, these are some other formulas. These are formulas from the Zunsheng Bajian, the 8 treatises on like respecting this movement of Sheng, this movement of growth. So this is a nourishing life text from the Ming Dynasty. So in springtime, they recommend a couple of formulas. One of the formulas they recommend is Juhuasan. This is especially because we can have allergies, right? So we have Juhua, we have Feng Feng. These are things that help treat allergies. And interestingly, the other one is for elderly people in the spring. So it's not only for elderly people, it's people who tend to be weak. It's Chenpi Gansao together. And this is called nourishing or prolonging life powder. Why? Because it opens the spleen and stomach. If we have stagnation, if people can't resonate with yang, if they're deficient and they can't move, that stagnation of qi will eventually affect the spleen and stomach. Why? Because spleen and stomach are also in the job of moving and transforming. So if liver can't move, because liver is stuck, people are deficient of yang, that means sometimes the spleen and stomach also can't move, which is why in liver formulas, we like think of the free and easy wanderer, Xiaoyaosan, we also have spleen stomach herbs at the same time, right? Because we need to get liver moving, spleen and stomach moving. So if people are stagnant and they can't move, getting the spleen and stomach to move is also an important strategy in springtime. So we have this as a possible formula. Okay. This is just something else that we see in the same text. This is called the Song of Preventing Disease in the Four Seasons. And what we see here, you have the translation. This is basically a Qigong exercise. So these are different breathing patterns that we can use in the four seasons that put us in this movement of everything. We might go a little past the hour and a half, Tom. So those of you who want to hang out here, we'll just keep on talking. If we have questions, I'll answer questions. This is the topic, for example, of we're doing an online continuing education course on clinical Qigong, which is the use of not using your Qi to heal people, but what kind of exercises can we do to treat disease based on pattern differential, and also based on seasonality. So there are different Qigong exercises we can do for the different seasons. One of them is called the Liu Zijue, the 6 sounds. And these are syllables that match with the organs that we can use as a way of preventing disease in the seasons, right? So that's something else. Okay. I think I've chatted enough. You have references at the end. If you want to read my seasonal node blog, this is my website, asianmedicine.org. I blog about the seasonal nodes. I blog about seasonal Yangsheng. We do a clinical Qigong course, and you're all invited if you want to join me for weekly free Qigong. It's pandemic Qigong. I told people in April 2020, when we started this class, I said, we'll do it until August and reevaluate. But I failed to mention August of what year. So we're still reevaluating. Okay, let's get out of that. Sherry, thank you for pulling up the equinox. So there we go. Questions. I'll open the floor up to questions if we have.
All right, before we head on to the Q&A
yes,
session,
go ahead.
I want to thank Henry on behalf of the group for being so generous with your time and your knowledge, and not only for tonight, I'm grateful for what you do for us tonight, but also the good work that you do on behalf of the profession. So I want to thank you for that.